This video is sponsored by Raycon. The home invasion is undeniably my favourite subgenre in horror, especially when it merges greatly with the intimate intensity of siege thrillers. It opens a lot to the imagination as you think about how you would overcome the threat in your own power fantasy, while making for a constant adrenaline rush as danger comes from every corner, and hiding or running away just isn't a valid solution at this point. Seeing characters fight back despite the odds being stacked against them is both inherently terrifying and empowering, with the moments of levity in between to prepare for the next attack providing a genuinely cathartic release from the pressure when physical danger is an absolute guarantee. In these types of films, it's all about conveying an effective balance of power. In other words, if it's one versus many, it is still believable for that single individual to prevail, provided a necessary level of stress and strain is brought down upon them that sees them emerge as an entirely different person in the end. That's what I think separates a violent, gritty thriller like Die Hard from your weightless bravado power fantasies. Both have their rightful place in entertainment, and I'm absolutely not knocking a cheeky wee popcorn flick, but with siege and home invasion films specifically, that sense of power feels profoundly earned, and thus has a tangibility you just can't achieve with making your heroes practically invincible. Although conversely, it can also serve to disempower the protagonists by invading their safety and sanctuary and stripping it away from them, leading to bleak and soul-crushing horrors that do their job at reinforcing the reality of random acts of nihilistic violence. And even if our heroes do succeed, it's not necessarily for the better. However, this isn't that type of video, thankfully. No, this is one about taking that legitimate feeling of danger and sustaining it right to the end, while providing us with a hero with real grit and tenacity who gives the bad guys a great big kick up the hole. Alright, Jesus, you made your point.
Anyone know this guy?
Director and editor Adam Wingard and writer Simon Barrett's You're Next is just an all-round fantastic piece of filmmaking that I would like to believe exists in the same universe as their follow-up film The Guest, as they act more like genre hybrids that don't conform to one specific tone. It was thanks to Bloody Disgusting that this film entered my radar back in 2011, as I remember them hyping it as the next big masterpiece horror movie receiving immense acclaim at various festivals, before eventually obtaining a theatrical release 2 years later, and while it didn't live up to that sort of hype, it was still a worthwhile experience nonetheless. As Adam Wingard explains, the film drew influence from other home invasion horrors at the time, including Them, The Strangers, and Inside, only for writer Simon Barrett to deconstruct the premise and go against the brutally nihilistic tone of those films, as well as contrasting with Wingard and Barrett's previous film, A Horrible Way to Die, which, yes, as the title implies, is a pretty grim watch as well. At its core, home invasion horror aligns closer to the concept of holding out hope that help will eventually come, as opposed to directly taking control of the situation that's more prominent in siege thrillers. And so Barrett said that You're Next was more or less aiming to subvert that standard by creating a protagonist who is the antithesis of the passive characters you see in home invasion movies. As a general summary, You're Next tells the story of the Davison family as they reunite at their parents' secluded home in Missouri, only to be attacked by 3 masked men identified as Fox, Lamb, and Tiger, who viciously murder each family member one by one.
Were you saying something?
However, unbeknownst to the killers, one of the siblings' partners, Erin, is a born and bred survivalist who takes immediate action by setting up traps, locking down the house, and defending herself with such clinical composure and intelligence that by the final act of the story, Erin is the one that the killers kinda become afraid of. I've heard many people describe You're Next as bordering on a really dark comedy, but I honestly did not see it that way. There is some humor in seeing how people react to Erin's talent for killing people, but I actually think it plays it pretty straight for the most part, by escalating the danger and violence as the night moves along, as the killers find themselves struggling to do their job as efficiently as they plan to. Now, I hate throwing the term tense around because I think it's lost all meaning with how often it's used to describe horror movies, but I think You're Next is deservingly fitting off the description. After the parent's neighbour is murdered in the introduction as a literal warm-up to the main event, as it mirrors their behaviour when in the family's house, the killer's presence is never ceasing. I've said it in dozens of videos before, but I'm going to say it again. It's the Hitchcock bomb under the table logic. You know the killers are there, there's no build up to their arrival. That unease already exists as the family goes about their business unknowingly, and as we approach the night of the attack, all you're thinking about is that moment when they will finally strike. Your adrenaline has already reached a tipping point and you're fucking ready for it. But even then, it still finds a way to completely catch you off guard. Yeah, I ducked under my front door for weeks after watching that scene. Alright, so You're Next firmly sits within the John Carpenter philosophy of filmmaking. Its story is a solid foundation for unpretentious, gleeful creativity that's equal parts disgusting and gratifying without overindulging on what it shows. The violence has a tangible sense of impact. When someone is hit with an axe, a mallet, or killed in one of the many distinct ways, it gives the right amount of visual and auditory emphasis that's indicative of provocative 80s slasher flicks. While I wouldn't say the characters outside of Erin are particularly noteworthy, I felt enough sympathy to engage with the underlying tragedy and bleakness of the story, especially after the father Paul watches his youngest daughter Amy violently bleed out in front of him, and just shortly after, he and his sons find his wife viciously murdered in their bedroom. There's a very subtle yet retrospectively extreme tonal shift throughout the movie. In the first half, it's deliberately unpleasant and visually uncompromising, like the films Wingard and Barrett set out to deviate from. But in the second half, all these unpleasantries and tragedies are played at the expense of the villains. However, for this discussion to work, I have to talk about Erin's efforts to fight back that do reveal more of the story, so if you want to go in blindly, well, to be honest, you probably should have left by now, but make sure to leave a comment below to help boost this video in the algorithm. Actually, now is probably a good time to take a break and talk about this video's sponsor, Raycon. As we all know, horror depends a lot on precise and meticulous sound design to really immerse yourself in the atmosphere, and that's why I highly recommend Raycon's everyday E25 earbuds to enhance your horror experience. With a noise isolating fit and lightweight non-intrusive design, these cheeky wee earbuds are a fantastic way to get consistent clear sound quality while watching your favorite horror movies like the topic of this video, and listening to music, audiobooks and podcasts without the frustration of untangling wires, wearing heavy ear-irritating headsets, or earphones that just constantly fall out. Bless you Raycon for including different bud sizes. Thanks to their seamless Bluetooth pairing and 6 hours off playtime, it's easy to just pop them in, hit play, and go about your day. But most importantly, by getting your hands on a pair of everyday E25 earbuds, you will be listening to me say words like however, peeing, harrowing, and subversive in the way God intended. Raycon has a 45-day free return policy if you're not satisfied, so with no risk and prices starting at about half the price of any other premium wireless earbuds on the market, click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your order. And now back to You're Next. So there's a scene around the halfway mark where the tiger mask guy enters through the window to dramatic music and menacing slow motion, only for it to instantly cut out the moment Aaron batters him in the back of the head as he screams in agony, and shortly after his brother finds his corpse and breaks down in despair. Basically, all this pain inflicted upon the family is being returned, and the killers begin to lose the domineering presence they cockily assumed they always had. It restores power back to the protagonist, as the killers are now humanized in a way that exposes them to the same vulnerability, but very importantly, it does this without eradicating their threat entirely. I respect that the film doesn't completely give Aaron instant control. It still has to be earned through perseverance like other home invasion or siege narratives. The reason it's so paramount to the second half is that it stops the tension from dissipating, which I think is a problem with most horror movies that shift towards action-packed finales. Don't get me wrong, there's no problem with conveying emotional levity through empowerment, but by maintaining that balance of power with the opposition, the film stays grounded and a lingering nihilism inherent to horror remains. It's exactly why Die Hard is my favourite action movie. John McClane is not an action hero, he's skilled and intelligent, but still just an ordinary guy with the same flaws and fallacies as the rest of us. I actually wish I explored it more in my collector video, but similarly, Arkin is a really experienced and smart protagonist who gets the upper hand in multiple scenes, but that doesn't mean he stops struggling to survive. We're still watching a horror movie after all. Embracing fallacy and imperfection are part of the experience to make the audience feel real deserved progression. As a matter of fact, I did a video a couple of years ago on the topic of why dumb decisions matter in horror movies, and how it's a fundamental plot device to Jeremy Saulnier's masterpieces Green Room and Blue Ruin, and while I won't go too deeply into it, it absolutely draws an interesting comparison. In that video, I said Saulnier describes his thrillers as haphazard, where intuition overshadows intellect. It's easy for us to sit in comfort and stuff our faces with snacks while criticizing characters for doing silly things in horror movies, which is also mocked in the slasher satire Scream. But let's be honest with ourselves, when our lives are at risk and under intense pressure with the threat of death, we're probably going to do a lot of dumb shit too, because we are human, we are a reactionary species that typically acts first, thinks second. Our natural instinct is to run from danger or freeze up, and Green Room very daringly shows us smart protagonists who still make silly mistakes because, simply put, they're fucking scared, and it is incredibly difficult to process such overwhelming emotions. We don't all just suddenly become tacticians who can outsmart the danger. When trapped in the moment, rationale typically goes right out the window. Like I said earlier, Wingard and Barrett openly acknowledged that the point of the film was to create a smart hero who went against the traditional passive protagonist, but it's played off so naturally that it doesn't feel out of place. If Erin suddenly became this perfect killer who outsmarts her danger at every turn, the tension would be lost because the expectation is that she's going to win anyway, so why worry about her? That home invasion nihilism is still festering, and thus you are emotionally invested in her safety, and it makes her victory even more rewarding. Now, to be honest, I would have preferred if we did not learn about Erin's survivalist upbringing because it would have added a bit more mystique to her surprising behaviour, but I'll admit that's an unfair nitpick from Mr. Ambiguous here. Before we end, the major plot reveal is that two of the siblings, Erin's boyfriend Crispin and Felix and his girlfriend Zoe, are in cahoots with the killers in a bid to obtain the brothers' inheritance. But the reality is, the people they hired might be ex-military, but they clearly have no idea what they're actually doing. While at the very least you could say they are competent killers, they don't exactly plan their operation all that strategically compared to, let's say, the Collector, who boarded up the house, set traps, and made it inescapable, which is pretty much what Aaron almost does. Your Next seamlessly pulls together the best of both worlds. We get that grim portrayal of violence that makes us feel the reality of the situation, but there is a meticulously controlled levity to how Erin overcomes her opposition that's gratifying and exciting. In short, it is a power fantasy done right, because like the age-old tradition of storytelling proves, character development cannot be manufactured by giving your hero a simple deus ex machina. They need to truly live and breathe in the trials and tribulations of the world, very much like the rest of us.